Due Process, winner of 10 Emmys, including a 2007 Mid-Atlantic Emmy for in-depth reporting.
What happened here is my client got screwed by a racist system, and most of all by you.
I strongly caution you, Mr. Kellerman.
No, don't think just because...
He's a new kind of TV lawyer, and if his passionate public defender rings true, that may be because he's based on...
You're in contempt.
And created by his former PD turned professor turned TV producer. Seton Hall Law's David Feige, raising the bar. Up next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.
The life of the public defender, overworked, underpaid, and often portrayed as decidedly second-rate. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King, and America's about to get a brand new take on the beleaguered public defender, thanks to this former PD.
There have been private lawyers on television. There have been, God knows, a gazillion prosecutors. But by and large, TV has shied away from portraying our side of the equation. And that's something that we really do, and I think we do well, and honestly. And that's very important to me, because I feel like we have been misportrayed horribly over these many years.
Miller, you going to AP3? These are easy, please. Notes are on there. Thanks, man.
And frankly, television is a huge medium. It's a massive platform. You know, I wrote a book. What started the whole thing was I wrote a book called Indefensible. But, you know, even if the book does well, it reaches, what, 20, 50, 100,000 people if you do really, really well, which I didn't. But, you know, we premiere, and if all goes well, 3 million people will be watching.
And if David Feige's right, they'll be watching his show called Raising the Bar on Monday nights at 10 on TNT beginning next week. David, welcome to Due Process, and congratulations on making the jump from the South Bronx to Hollywood.
Thank you.
David, I'm a big fan. I've watched some of the episodes you've sent to Sandy and I. We teach together at Seton Hall. My wife teaches in your program that you've designed. All that said, and also I've always been on the defense side in terms of my profession. That said, there is a question that I've got to ask you, which is that in terms of popular culture, it seems to me that the body politic, the body cultural is focused on law enforcement, on police, on forensics, and on the notion that we just want to arrest people, and not too much on due process, let alone the most benign factor in the justice system. Why do you think that's going to be successful TV, however good the stories are and however good the values are?
Because it's true. And at the root, I think that when you're saying something that's true, people understand it. You know, it's that thing that jurors always say, well, I think you can hear when something's true. And the reality is, we've seen a very particular portrayal of the criminal justice system over and over and over, you know, on Law and Order and basically almost every other show. And what we haven't seen is the other side, and it's high time for that. And I think that now's the time. I think America's ready. I hope so.
One of the things, and Raymond, I think we're calling this clip number 4, one of the things that is illustrated in one of the clips that you sent us is how the life of the public defender is not just complicated by all of the problems that one has in trying to defend people innocent or guilty, but in some real basic stuff like dealing with judges, like money problems. So, Laurel, let's take a look at that clip.
Hey, are you ready?
I got a no forensics rape case with a crappy family alibi. ADA won't listen to a word I say, so in about an hour, I'm going to defend an innocent guy in front of a crazy judge. What's not to be ready for?
All right, David, is that an exaggeration of what the PD's up against?
No, in fact, not at all. One of the things we expect, one of the things I expect in this show is exactly that question. Wait, this can't possibly be right. But the truth is, it is. We have enormous caseloads. We're under tremendous pressure. We're shortchanged. The prosecution always has resources that far outstrip anything they give to us, and so we're always the underdog. And we play the game as the underdog. And we haven't really seen that on television before. And I'm hoping that people will start to understand what life on our side is like.
Thus far in the episodes we've seen, you do seem to be able to do that with avoiding preachiness. Over time, can you continue to heat resource questions, which are really the subject of litigation and policy debates in legislatures and serious conversation, without seeming preachy and moving from entertainment into another realm?
I think so. I mean, we do the sort of resource question, like, oh my God, what am I going to do, in one of the early episodes, and we pretty much leave it at that. The good news is there are so many issues and so many problems in the criminal justice system. We don't have to spend more than one episode. We got a whole laundry list to cover.
Let me mention another issue that you can't avoid if you're doing this subject, which is race. And Sandy, I think we call this clip number 1, but it's one where in a conversation between a public defender and a DA who are really friends, the issue of race comes up in a kind of subtle way. Maybe we'll take a look at it and see how it plays out.
Oh, that's great. Make fun of putting your own people in prison.
My people? Did you seriously just say that? My people, Jerry, are the good citizens of this fine city. Your clients, on the other hand, are criminals. Yes, it's your people, Jerry, that terrorize my people. Now, go deal with whatever scumbag you're defending today, and I'll see you tonight.
Now, the phrase "your people" is talismanic, but there's a lot more in that scene.
Yeah, look, this is another thing that may be controversial, may be interesting, I hope, to viewers of the show, which is this is a show about race and class. It's a show about the criminal justice system, and you can't be honest when you're talking about the criminal justice system unless you're ready to talk about race and class. It's a show about a dysfunctional system, and you can't do an honest show about a dysfunctional system unless you start talking about what happens to the vast number of poor people that the system processes every day without anybody really noticing.
And we know from your book, and Laurel, I think we've got a copy of it, your book Indefensible, that in fact you believe that the system, as your character says in the tease to this show, the system screws people, and particularly people of color.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
With that, I apologize to the network and everybody, but yeah, that is what I think. And let me be clear, that's certainly Jerry Kellerman's perspective, as Jerry very much gives voice to mine. It's not the centerpiece of the show. The show really does bring in, as you saw, Marcus, the African-American prosecutor who we just saw, gives a very solid voice to the prosecution point of view. Jerry gives a solid voice to the defender point of view. And something that Steven Bochco, who I did the show with, taught me really early on is, because my early drafts, by the way, were horribly preachy.
Who is Bochco, so people know? What has he done?
He has done L.A. Law, Hill Street Blues, Doogie Howser, NYPD Blue, pretty much every great show out there. He's an astonishing guy. And early on, he said to me, look, you only have real drama when you get the clash of legitimate worldviews.
Because your initial idea was to present the PD point of view.
Yes.
And Bochco said, forget it.
Exactly. He said, at some point, people don't want to hear about it. At some point, it's going to have run into exactly the problems that you were talking about. And I think, frankly, he's right, as Stephen almost always is in these things, and the show is better for showing both points of view. That said, what's meaningful to me, in many ways, is the public defender point of view that we haven't heard.
Right, let me pick at something else. Normally, I just got to tell you that I like this, even though I don't usually like TV shows or movies that are about lawyers, because I'm always saying, well, that wouldn't really happen. But I think that there's a lot of truthfulness to this. But is this a New York truth? I mean, I went to law school in California. I've had some experiences in my life that show me this isn't just one country, and TNT is nationwide.
Right.
Isn't this a New Yorkie show?
It is a New Yorkie show in terms of its vibe, and it's certainly in terms of the look. I mean, we set it very conspicuously in New York City, and the procedures you see are a bit of an amalgam between the Bronx and Manhattan, and sort of the physical layout.
The Bronx
of things.
having been where you did your PD thing for 15 years.
Yeah, I was in the Bronx, I was there from '97 on. I was the trial chief of the Bronx Defenders, which is, in my view, one of the finest public defender offices in the country, and that, by the way, was the best job I ever had, and I think ever will. But,
including this one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you go home at the end of the day after having been a public defender, and you have a really deep-seated sense of righteousness. Every single day you can say, you know what, this is what I did, this was the life I touched. And frankly, making a television show is far more amorphous.
Let me show you, there's a clip which we've known as number 5, which I find very interesting because I think it deals with both the human dimension, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand this, as well as the reality that public defenders face because they're frequently in front of the same judge all the time. With me, it's one judge, one trial, I move on.
Right.
But this clip, I think, gives us a human dimension on the legal issue that I think folks would find intriguing.
My only problem is Edgar Rodriguez and his family. He's a sole earner. He's facing life in prison because he cannot get a fair trial. You were a public defender once. All I'm asking for is an ounce of compassion from a system that already discriminates against my clients.
Now, what you are asking for is a special exception, which, if granted, would arguably make this an unfair trial. For the 3rd time, your request is denied.
There are a lot of people skills involved in that, but it really makes it human. Why did you, is that judge over the top in your experience? Because I think people who watch this are going to see a lot of tension between those two.
Yeah, I think they're going to see, one of the criticisms or responses that I expect is, wait, judges aren't really like that. There aren't judges like Trudy Kessler out there. And to every one of those viewers, I say, go down to your local courthouse, talk to some of the lawyers who practice there, talk to some of the judges who preside there, and every one of them will say, oh, she's nothing. You should see what I see.
Or pick up your book
yes.
where you write about judges by name.
Oh, yeah.
I was amazed when I read that these are real names when you consider how wacky a lot of these people are and irresponsible.
Yeah, well, I think that there's a lot of irresponsibility in the judiciary. I think that we have been taught, again, by the shows that we watch and the messages we get, that the system is this great thing that works like clockwork and judges are, you know, all devoted to justice. And God, of course, prosecutors have, you know, handsome square jaws and are always righteous, but that wasn't my experience at all. I found the system rife with injustice, uncaring, and frankly, appalling in many ways.
Are there any criticisms of the life or the work of public defenders that people will find in the show, or is it just a critique of judges and DAs?
No, I think that there's our prosecutors are the ones who give voice to the concerns about, you know, Jerry's stridency, his militancy. You know, there are a lot of lines in there that sort of make fun of Jerry and his, you know, attitudes toward the system.
Let me ask you just one question. This is burning about sex. It seems to me that there is a little bit of a little sexual tension that underlies almost every relationship in this, which is kind of interesting. Now, is that the Bronx, the East Coast, the world, or your mind?
Welcome to television.
Okay.
That's, you know, far more than anything else. That is a function of the fact that you know, viewers want to see relationships as well as issues and great stories. And I think we provide great stories and interesting relationships. And frankly, they tend to be a lot more interesting when, you know, there's some romance, some tension, some love. So yeah, we throw that in. It's TV.
You know, you were talking about the Kellerman stridency. But that, of course, isn't really what you were talking about when you talked about the really lousy image that PDs have.
No.
And we know about it from interviewing people who've been in the system and how often they say, well, I had a PD
Right.
and I got screwed because I had a PD.
Right.
So the reputation is really about being overloaded, doing a lousy job as a result, being burned out and therefore not caring about the client. Aren't those the things that really burn you and that you're trying to turn around here?
They do. Those things do upset me, in part because I don't think they're accurate. The public defenders that I worked with were incredibly well-educated, unbelievably devoted, cared passionately about their clients.
Did their clients get as good a shake as, well, let's
I don't
not
know
say
about
Raymond.
I don't know about Raymond, but I will say this.
But as the typical
Yes,
private
I would
defense
say
attorney.
better in most instances. My experience is the very, very rich can afford phenomenal representation. And then the very, very poor, if they're lucky and get certain lawyers, can get really, really great representation. And in the middle, it's a little bit dicey.
While you're talking about resources, because that you'll concede, there's no way that you can keep up with.
Right.
You've got Laura, we're calling it number 3. You've got a great moment where something that would seem to be so trivial, a plane ticket to get an essential witness, isn't possible. How could this be, Laura? Let's take a look.
Jerry, you look fantastic.
Pedro Morales got deported last night.
What happened?
Don't ask. Prosecution's gonna rest by tomorrow. I need to get him back up here. Do we have the funds for another plane ticket?
Not on hand.
Roz, I got no defense without the guy.
And I'm not a miracle worker. It's going to take me a couple of days.
Yeah, which Kessler's gonna be more than happy to give me.
Can you try?
Do I have a choice?
That's a very interesting sort of critical moment in a plot that weaves around a guy that you think either is overcharged or innocent.
Right.
Why did you focus on the ticket as kind of a symbol, and why was that important to the larger point Sandy talks about?
Well, in part just because it was such a nice, easy, a nice, easy plot device, frankly, and in part because, you know, people don't think to themselves, well, shoot, if you're a public defender and your witness is out of state or out of the country, how do you get them? And, you know, that's one of the things you actually have to deal with is how do you get your witnesses? How do you find them? How do you bring them in? And we don't have, in New York City, you know, there's an army of 30,000 plus police officers who do that task for the prosecutors. The prosecutors have a whole staff, they dispatch people, you know, the NYPD goes and rounds them up, they've got funds. In the public defender's office, it's you, maybe your investigator, and sometimes going to your boss going, this is what I need, can we please do it? And then you go on kayak.
But how shocking that she says she'd have to be a miracle worker to make it happen.
Well, right there, as you know, she says you got to give me a few days because, you know, it's in my experience.
But we also find out you didn't have a few days.
Well, that's right. In my experience, in the Bronx, we basically always got it done. It wasn't always easy, and there were often a lot went into it. I mean, look, there were times. I remember times where we were like, okay, who's got $20? We got to get this. We got to get this guy. You know, that's how it goes.
One of the interesting decisions you make that goes beyond the public defender here is to humanize the accused,
yes.
Which is a very interesting decision, and it strikes me the place you're going to run up against the greatest likelihood that people will reject the show. Mm-hmm. Because whether the issue is about guilt or innocence or degree of guilt, there is a sense in which you try to tell the story of the accused in each one of these trials, around which are all these people with all these other issues, sex and other things going on. But that decision to also focus on the accused, was that viewed by you as a risky decision when you made it? Because it seems to me that's the point at which people who are in the street saying, look, I want to know about victims, that's who's really getting hurt,
right.
Are not necessarily going to cotton to that.
Well, let me say two things about that. Not only was it a decision, it was essential. It was essential to making the kind of show that I very much wanted Raising the Bar to be. Because the truth of the matter is, we have no idea what criminal defendants actually are like. We never see them. They're cardboard cutout figures on television and so much processed spam in the courtroom. I mean, people are herded through the criminal justice system with nary so much as an investigation into who they are, who they love, what they think. Nobody cares.
Yeah,
nobody asks.
But isn't that the point? Isn't that what Raymond was saying? That nobody does care.
But they should.
Okay, you say in your book, if you look, speaking about the defendant, if you look hard enough, there is a story, a human drama, that casts in a different light the horrific specter of criminality.
Right.
That's a very controversial idea in this age.
See, here's what I'd say about that. You know, when people of faith get up and talk about the essential redemptive qualities of human beings, everybody embraces them. Oh yes, we can redeem everyone. Any sinner, anybody can be brought back. When I do that in the criminal justice context as a secular humanist, it sounds like nonsense. It's not nonsense. I know these people. I know their mothers, I know their kids, I get to understand their background, and when you start to make a human connection with someone, the idea of putting them in a cage for 20 years becomes abominable.
But let me bring up an example where you might be working against yourself, because in clip number 7 you have a very interesting vignette between a young DA and his boss. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is, because you haven't tried to make this all good DAs against all evil, all good defenders against all evil DAs, he's talking to his boss about maybe showing some leniency to an accused who he prosecuted but thinks may not deserve all the punishment he's going to get. Right. Let's look at it and see whether you're working at cross purposes.
The schizophrenic camera snatcher.
Don't even.
If we dismiss the felony off the indictment...
What's the matter with you?
Leaving the petty larceny...
And sending a message to every hick tourist that New York City streets are a menace to life and limb.
There wasn't any injury, Nick.
Miracles occur, but not in court.
The guy needs treatment.
Am I supposed to care? We get paid to convict. Earn your paycheck, Marcus.
So here's an interesting example in which you're suggesting that the compassion of a young DA is rejected by the system. How does that comport with people's views of how the system works, and how does that advance the goal of drawing people into this as a real world and understanding the points you want to make?
Well, I think it is, I think that Nick Bochco, the boss there, is giving voice to a very real perspective out there. Even among prosecutors, not all of them. Certainly Marcus and Michelle, the other prosecutors in the office, don't feel that way. Marcus, I think, is a character who has a very clear moral compass and wants to do the right thing. And one of the interesting things about this show is it resists the temptation to make everything a murder case and have a one count guilty, not guilty kind of ending. In reality, of course, there are 500 murders a year and 300,000 arrests in New York in a year. And the show has conscientiously aimed for the meat of the curve, to look at what the other, 299,500 cases actually look like. And to grapple, by the way, not so much just with guilt and innocence, but with the complicated moral gray area of, well, what's that worth?
But how scary is it if we get paid to convict is the credo, then is guilt or innocence or justice lost in that play?
And I think the answer for me is too often yes.
Let me delve into the complicated moral gray area one more time on a clip that's called number 2, because Sandy really likes it. But it has to do with them being in a bar. Oops, that's not Sandy. But they're talking afterwards, and it has to do, I think, with maybe the intensity and whether it's too much or too little with the central character. Let's look at that one.
You guys in the DA's office are unbelievable. You screw with people's lives all day. And then come 5 o'clock, it's like, hey, okay, school's out, let's all get loaded together.
Here we go.
Come on, Jerry, man. We all go back too many years. Lighten up. We do our job, you do yours. That's the system. It's not personal.
You see, that's the problem with y'all. It is personal. It's very personal. My guy's looking at 25 years for a rape he didn't do, and everyone thinks I'm a jerk because I just can't have a drink, play nice, and let it all go.
Okay, so
Sound familiar?
I would say that Jerry is not a jerk, but I would say that Jerry, at this level of intensity, can last maybe 5 years before he totally burns out and either flips out or winds up doing insurance law.
Well, insofar as he's sort of me, and I managed, I think 13 or 14 years, I can tell you there's ways to cope, but I can also tell you that in those moments, particularly if you're looking at the conviction of an innocent client, which is just gut-wrenching. I mean, that's a soul-searing experience. It is a very hard thing to just come to the table and pretend it's not happening. You live that life, and you live your life with your client right there, and their entire fate rests in your hands, and that's not something that real public defenders take lightly. They take that very
Here's
seriously.
where the question of reality comes in, because my answer to the question of what to do with a person like that would be to say, what's the level of supervision, what's the level of training he's getting, because you can also cross the line, be guilty of obstruction, go too far, or lose your mind in wrestling with these issues. How do you broach those issues, which it seems to me, again, are deep policy issues that involve the whole society when it cares?
Right. What I would say is, to the extent to which we are addressing deep policy issues, the show is really doing its job in both being great entertainment and fun, character-driven drama, and asking really deep, significant questions about the system and about the extent to which the system either is or is not functioning well.
And the deep questions are asked in bars sometimes?
Sometimes, oftentimes. I think, look, one of the conceits of the show, and let's just call it what it is, it's a conceit of the show, is to bring our characters together in a central place. And given that public defenders and prosecutors don't always come together in a lot of places, well, we put them in the bar together and we made them friends, and that gives us that wonderful opportunity to air out these really deep-seated disagreements.
You say again in the book that you were able to sleep well at night because you were a public defender.
Yes.
You're not a public defender anymore. Did you sleep better then?
Oh God, yeah. Well, I sleep pretty well all the time, but the sleep of the just, I certainly slept more often then. I love being a law professor. I like being a TV writer. I'm having a great time, but nothing will compare to the intensity and the intimacy of working alongside a bunch of deeply committed people engaged engaged in what I consider to be an incredibly important struggle.
I'm hoping that Raising the Bar is so successful we'll have to come back and talk to you at regular intervals about what you did recently. But David, I got to tell you, it's been a great half hour. Good luck with Raising the Bar, of course, and we hope you get those 3 million viewers next week. Meanwhile, for our viewers, one final note on Due Process. We've just received another 5 Mid-Atlantic Emmy nominations, including 1 individual achievement nod for Sandy as Best Writer. That brings our total nominations to over 60. Our wins stand at 11. And we'll let you know next month how we make out this year. For Sandy and all of us here on Raymond Brown, you may not be 3 million, but we're awfully glad you're out there. We'll be back next week and every week. Thanks for watching.
Someone who represents indigent people in a criminal case.
They're hardworking, little pay, a lot of hours.
There's certain things they can't do. They back down when you really need them.
Sometimes they're portrayed in the media as not, the best or not exactly doing what they're supposed to be doing.
I hope I never need one. I guess that's what comes to mind.
I think they're usually overworked and maybe not always get best care if you're relying on them.
Fortunately, I don't think there are enough of them, and I don't think they're paid well enough.
I'm glad the system has that, because we're not always fortunate enough to be able to afford an attorney, and everyone needs representation. So it's a good thing.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.